Laura and I have sort of an unwritten rule at our house that unless we're going up to West Lafayette for a Purdue game or downtown Indianapolis for a Pacers game, she's the one who drives. And there are a couple reasons for that. Number one, she doesn't really care for my driving. Fair enough. But number two, her car has Sirius XM radio, and mine does not. You know, in my car, I keep it pretty simple. I've got 6 stations that I rotate between. If I'm looking for music, I've got 2 country stations, Hank FM and WFMS. And then if I'm looking for either classic rock or the Bob and Tom Show, I've got Q95. And then if I'm looking for either sports or news talk radio, I've got WIBC, WNDE, and 1070 The Fan. Pretty simple. But with Laura, she's got the Sirius XM radio, so on top of those AM and FM channels, she's got 236 unique stations that she can listen to. And actually, the other day we were cycling through and we found an entire station that's totally dedicated to the Beach Boys. Now, I love the Beach Boys as much as the next person, but it still kind of boggles my mind that there's an entire station that plays 100% Beach Boys 24 hours without any commercials. It's pretty mind-boggling. But Laura and I have very, very different tastes in music, but I will say she's a very good sport when it comes to her XM radio. She's got a couple of country stations on there that she's programmed in her car just for me, and she lets me cycle through, see if there's anything, if there's a song that I like, something like that. And the other day we were going, and one of the channels on there that I particularly like is dedicated 100% to country hits from the early 2000s. And we're listening to it, and sure enough, on comes the Randy Travis hit, 3 Wooden Crosses. I love the song, so I crank it up, and I'm belting out the lyrics. And as I'm singing the song, it dawns on me that it's really written kind of like a parable. And, and why is that? When you think about what constitutes a parable, a relatively simple story, with basically anonymous characters that illustrate some kind of spiritual or moral lesson. It's Jesus' parables that, we come to meet people like the prodigal son. The prodigal son asks for and receives his inheritance early. He goes off, he squanders it, he comes back home. His father's there to welcome him with open arms, and his brother, not quite so ready to forgive. Well, what's the moral of the story there? Well, number one, be smart with your money. But number two, that we're supposed to love people even when they screw up, just as God loves us even when we screw up. But the fascinating thing, like I said, with Jesus' parables is that he never gives anyone's name. So we're not really sure if the people in the parables are actual acquaintances of Jesus, or if they are maybe somebody that Jesus heard about from a friend and he just retold the story, or maybe they're kind of a compilation of a handful of people that he uses to illustrate a point. They might not even be real people at all. With the prodigal son, it could have been a prodigal daughter that came home to a loving mother and a jealous sister. We don't know. But that's kind of the beauty of it. But when you read these parables, like I said, relatively short, even in their entirety, are only about 3 minutes long or so, which is about the length of this Randy Travis song. And it's got these basically, like I said, anonymous characters that kind of illustrate this moral lesson. And you've got a farmer and a teacher, a hooker and a preacher, riding on a midnight bus bound for Mexico. One was headed for vacation, one for higher education, and 2 of them were searching for lost souls. Well, that driver never ever saw the stop sign, and 18-wheelers can't stop on a dime. So there are 3 wooden crosses on the right side of the highway. Why there's not 4 of them, heaven only knows. But it's not what you take when you leave this world behind you. It's what you leave behind you when you go. Well, that farmer left a harvest, a home and 80 acres, the faith and love for growing things in his young son's heart. And that teacher left her wisdom in the minds of lots of children. She did her best to give them all a better start. And that preacher whispered, "Can't you see the promised land?" as he laid his blood-stained Bible in that hooker's hand. There are 3 wooden crosses on the right side of the highway. Why there's not four of them, heaven only knows. I guess it's not what you take when you leave this world behind you. It's what you leave behind you when you go. Well, it's the story that our preacher told last Sunday as he held that bloodstained Bible up for all of us to see. He said, bless the farmer and the teacher and that preacher who gave this Bible to my mama, who read it to me. There are 3 wooden crosses on the right side of the highway. Why there's not 4 of them, now I guess we know. It's not what you take when you leave this world behind you. It's what you leave behind you when you go. It reads just like a parable. You got these 4 relatively anonymous characters on the bus. You got the farmer, the teacher, the hooker, and the preacher. And we don't know exactly who these people are, but we can kind of picture them in your mind. You think about a farmer. In my case, I think about my grandfather, Bill Wood. Bill was born in Lagodi, Indiana. Was one of 7 children. As circumstances would have it, he ended up in the foster system. Ended up living about 20 miles north of Indianapolis in my hometown of Westfield. Well, Bill's foster parents farmed, so Bill became a farmer. He understood the value of education and the value of a dollar. He always believed that it was important to not only work hard for your money, but also have your money working hard for you. And, Bill was the kind of guy, he didn't say a whole lot, but when he did speak up, you got quiet and listened. And it was just that kind of down-home common sense advice that really kind of defined him. And actually, he always said, that God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. We're supposed to listen twice as much as we talk, which I don't always heed that advice as much as I should, but again, just kind of that down-home common sense is what Bill Wood, the farmer, left behind. Now think about a teacher in your mind. Well, for me, I think about my 5th grade teacher, Helen Bray. Helen always taught us respect for authority, respect for the rules, respect for America and freedom, respect for each other, and respect for our families and our friends, and respect for ourselves. Not every kid in the class was popular. Not every kid in the class got along, but Helen always still preached love and respect. Not every kid paid attention in class. Not every kid raised their hand before them speaking. But still, Helen preached love and respect. The late Aretha Franklin, had the famous song R-E-S-P-E-C-T, Find Out What It Means to Me. Well, for Helen, showing kids the meaning of love and respect is what she, the teacher, left behind. When you think about a preacher, for me, I think about Reverend Brian White. Now, to kind of set this up, give a little bit of context, Laura is a very, very big believer in, extraterrestrial beings, supernatural beings, that kind of thing. And I'm not quite as sold on aliens and ghosts and that kind of thing, but I do believe in curses, and I also believe in angels. Now, with the curses, that's part of just being a Chicago Cubs fan. We've had some of our best seasons derailed by a billy goat, a black cat, and a guy named Bartman. But finally, after over 100 years of futility and heartbreak, 17 minutes of rain washed away 108 years of drought. The Cubs finally won the World Series, and the curse was broken. But a long time before that's when I started believing in angels, and that's where Reverend Brian White comes in. Now, Brian was my youth pastor growing up, and he had the unenviable task of trying to corral 5 immature teenage boys, myself included. I don't know how he did that, yet there he was. And he saw us through some of the happiest times in our young lives, whether that was getting our driver's licenses or going to prom or graduating from high school, that sort of thing. But Brian also saw us through some of our darkest times as well. One of the young men in our group a few years ago took his own life. You can imagine who officiated the funeral, but part of me also believes that an angel named Brian White carried that young man to heaven. Channeling God's amazing grace and unconditional love for others, that's part of what Brian White, the preacher, left behind. Now, I want to make something very clear. Did Brian White complete seminary school and become ordained clergy? Yes. Does that mean that only people who complete seminary school and become ordained clergy can share the gospel message? No. It's the responsibility of all of us, of all Christians. Now think about it like this. If preparing food could only be done by professional chefs who had completed culinary school, there'd be a lot of hungry people out there. Likewise, if sharing the gospel message could only be done by ordained clergy who had completed seminary school, there'd be a lot of hungry people out there. Feeding